This is TWiT.
Covering Microsoft as I do for a living and following their quarterly results every quarter as I do, I have to say the amount of information we've gotten here, it stands in sharp contrast to what we usually get from this company.
I told Lisa last night, I said, don't put it in writing.
No, it is astonishing. So I went back and looked. This isn't in the notes per se, it doesn't really matter, but I just went back and looked. So in the last quarterly earnings report, right, Microsoft had all these vague pronouncements about gaming and Xbox, right? Gaming revenue overall was down 4%. Xbox content and services was down 3%. They've never said what the beginning number was, so we don't know.
Yeah, it's meaningless.
Where those things are.
It's doubled. It means nothing if you don't know.
Xbox hardware revenue was down 30%.
Yeah.
Blah 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 blah.
Blah blah blah.
If you look at their post-earnings conference call, Microsoft executives uttered the term Xbox 5 times, some version of gaming 14 times, compared to over 50 times for AI, over 40 times for Azure, over 40 times for cloud, and over 20 times for Windows, by the way. There's not a lot of information, They said during the conference call that Xbox subscriptions, which is the combination of Xbox Live and all the Game Pass subscriptions, nearly reached $1 billion in the quarter. Not quite, but nearly. So that's almost a $1 billion business, I guess. And that's
in a quarter, in a quarter, $4 billion business.
Okay, sorry. So that's what they said, right? That was nothing. And we get one filing in this set of days of hearings, and it's 118 bits of information that honestly are really interesting, I have to say. So it's interesting to learn more about this business. And so on that note, I want to thank the FTC. I hate you so much, but this has been a fascinating bit of disclosure that we just don't normally see.
To be clear, this is the administrative hearing to decide whether this case goes to trial, whether the FTC's case has merit. And so it's decided by a single judge. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. And he could throw it out.
He's listening. So they're talking to the judge. And there's been a lot of discovery, obviously, and a lot of emails on both sides revealed.
Lots of redactions. Right?
Yeah. Well, that's one thing. The judge is letting them hide business information, sales information, things like that.
They are, but yet, honestly, there's so much information that has come out regardless of that, right?
Yeah.
There's been some good hard numbers here.
Apple learned this in the Apple Epic lawsuit, that nobody wins in a lawsuit like this because of discovery.
Yeah, winning a lawsuit's like winning an earthquake. There's no such thing. Right?
So much is revealed, and usually embarrassing, because I don't know what it is about executives and email, but they kind of dump on
I tell you, if email. I do have an earthquake in Mexico City, I would like to win that one.
Yeah.
If I could.
Hey, I was wondering why that apartment was so cheap. Well, never mind.
Yeah, right. I was wondering why it sways when a truck drives by. Yeah. Anyway, so there's so much here. I kind of in the notes just blurted some stuff out. It's in sort of an order, but I think the most fascinating. I'm going to let you drive because I just, but I gave you guys a link to a resource at GameIndustry.biz that they're updating it daily, and they provide all these links to people that are writing about this stuff and all the various information that has come out. So it's been really interesting.
So that's your go-to for what happened?
Right before the show, I just came across it. And I was like, oh, look at this thing here. Here's a nice. They have a nice
timeline for all of this. You need to use the Web3 is going just great time, software, and you could really do something with this.
Yeah. Right.
Wow.
So anyway, I didn't organize what I wanted to talk about here by date or whatever. I did it by kind of topic. So in the beginning, what I have is the FTC is terrible and they need to be disbanded. So
we're in day 4, and they're taking testimony from executives, right?
Yeah, today we're going to see Satya Nadella. We're going to see
the CEO,
Bobby Sauron, the guy that runs the CEO of Activision. Wow. Whatever his real name is.
I wonder, is that his real name, Sauron? Because that's
no, I don't think so. But that's how I picture him.
You call him that? Oh, okay. You mean Bobby Kotick? Okay, now I get it. Okay.
As I asked Brad this morning, do you think this guy's going to show up on the stand? Does he actually take human form?
Satya Saruman and Bobby Sauron. I get it. Okay.
Like a blinking eye on the stand. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
He's not supposed to be that good of a guy. Anywho, so the FTC, as you do, you hire expert witnesses. So they hired an economist, I think from Harvard, right? Mm-hmm. And this guy has no idea what he's talking about. Awesome. So he literally, when pressed by Microsoft's lawyers, could not explain why this acquisition could in any way harm competition.
Whoops.
And it's one of the things that we've seen a lot in this case. This is something that's kind of happened over time, is like how you frame it. So from Microsoft's perspective, honestly, it kind of doesn't matter. So if you want to describe this market as being Microsoft and Sony, these two console makers, Microsoft loses every time, right? Is that true? Did they win one time? No, they lost every time. So the Microsoft, though, wants to phrase it as, well, actually, there's three companies in this market. And if you have three, we've always come in third, So they kind of go back at like this economist was really taking this kind of view that like the market was just these two companies. And it's like, yeah, but hold on a second. The gaming market is this giant thing. These companies are like some slice of it. There's much more going on here than that.
But do you buy that the third console is a Nintendo Switch, really? I mean...
Well, it's Nintendo full stop, right? Like,
yeah, because what console? The Wii? What are you talking about? I mean, the Switch is
depends on the generation.
Yeah.
Well,
but these days it's Xbox and PlayStation. It's not Xbox, PlayStation, and Switch.
Okay, well, like I said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you want to.
Well, that's one of the debates, right? Isn't it?
If it's well, and that's I think we talked about this at one point about antitrust. The one of the vaguenesses of antitrust is that you have to define the market.
Yeah, what's
that you're
the market?
describing,
right?
Mm-hmm. And you could describe it in any way. If you want to say that Microsoft dominates the market for x86 based operating systems, yeah, they do. But is that the market that they compete in, really? Because that market only really includes Linux now, right?
Yeah.
So they absolutely dominate that market. So for people or for company or organizations like the FTC that are trying to make a point, they want to point at something like Xbox Cloud Gaming, which is game streaming, and say that's a market,
like the UK, as the UK did.
Yeah, and it is. It's a tiny market. If it's if you look at gaming as a pie, I mean, it's a slice of the market that's so thin, like a pixel doesn't even, overstates like how much share that thing has by volume or by revenue, right? It's just a small thing. It's tiny. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It was also, I guess, an embarrassing. I've never seen I want to see the actual transcript for this part of it, but the FTC asked so many stupid questions of Phil Spencer that he ended up having to explain to them how mergers work, right? Which goes back to the editorial I wrote a week ago, where I said the FTC does not understand what its role is in antitrust. And I used the example of the EU Competition Committee, Marguerite Vestager, who spoke very eloquently to this topic about a week ago. She did that about a month ago. And this applies very much to the FTC. She basically said, look, some people think that being a regulator means that you just say no. And it's like, no, it's more complicated than that.
No, the job is to protect consumers, and that's it's for protecting consumers. Like, that is the gig.
Yeah,
so tell me how you have to define the market to say, okay, these are the consumers. How would they be harmed?
Exactly. And I think that's how the FTC's case falls apart, because you really can't logically make that case.
Yeah. I mean, the question is, does Judge Corley get that too?
Yeah, exactly.
Because she's relatively new to the federal bench.
Right.
But she's always worked in California and in this space. So I gotta think her experiences have been totally focused on all these deals should go through unless they can demonstrate harm.
Yeah. And the FTC is trying to make the point that all we have to do is introduce any little bit of doubt,
That might work on a jury. I can't imagine that working on a judge.
Right. I don't think so either. If you guys aren't reading Foss Patents, I strongly recommend doing so. Florian Miller has been doing an amazing job of covering this as well. But I think, to me, the big kind of takeaway from the console market, the thing we go back a few years, 2 years, 5 years, whatever, you said, what's the big difference between like Sony and the PlayStation and Microsoft and Xbox? I would have thought of these things as being very, very similar. Sony has pursued more of an exclusives kind of a strategy.
Yep. I think they always admire Nintendo.
Yeah.
Right. That has all of their own titles that never sell them to anybody else.
Yeah.
And owns their own little market. It is interesting to think there's 2 Japanese companies in the video game business and 1 American company. And it is the American government going after the American company. Like, wait, what?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is sort of is even worth mentioning. It's sort of a sidetrack, but I've been reading a lot about the early history of the video game and early home computer markets. And the big mistake that Atari made was they never protected their initial console, the VCS, the 2600.
Yeah.
And so it gave rise to this notion of third-party developers who were people not at Atari creating games for the system. There were too many of them. It created the video game crash of 1983, blah, blah, blah. Everyone kind of knows that history.
Yeah.
But in 1985, Nintendo wanted to come to the United States with what was going to be called the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System.
I did. I sold a lot of them.
Yep. And learning from Atari, they said, well, we're going to protect this thing. And what we're going to ensure is that only we release content for this device. Third parties have to come through us. They get our seal of approval. Out it goes.
They controlled the developer kits. You had to apply to get the developer kit.
Right. And, you could make the argument they kind of rescued the video game market. I think it was always going to come back, but
inevitably. Whatever. But they were the ones who did it. I mean, I remember working a kiosk, literally getting pallet loads of NESs and
same.
Never
same
got
thing.
to unload the pallet. Just started handing them to go to the till.
That's exactly right.
As fast as we could go.
I worked at a Toys R Us and I got a call one day from a guy who said, "Hey, I just came back from New York City and I saw this Nintendo." Now you got to remember the name Nintendo at that time meant like nothing. It was like, I think it was maybe, did they make Donkey Kong and maybe Mario Brothers?
Arcade games.
But they were nobody. So anyway, they had a video game system. This is what the guy said. I'll never forget this. He says, it comes with a gun that you can shoot at the TV and a robot that will play video games against you. And I said, sir, I think you're drinking. I've never heard of such a thing. That's crazy. And then 2 days later, we got these giant cages full of these things in. And that's what it was basically, right? But
Duck Hunt.
Yeah, but the model that they created was the one we still have today.
Yeah.
Literally, they invented it. And it's, this system where you have some kind of control over the console, right? So Xbox, Sony, whatever.
It's the quality control, because in the end, you took a Nintendo game and put it in a Nintendo machine. And so it's the Nintendo's fault if it sucks.
That's right. That's right. So they did a good job with that.
Atari learned this because they allowed third parties. Nintendo learned from Atari.
Atari was the
And
coincidentally, my whiskey story ties into this too.
Oh my God!
I'm just going to give you a full loop back.
Stay tuned.
And I will also say, coincidentally, that the first third-party video game company of all time was, wait for it, Activision. A group of 4 or 5, I don't remember, ex-Atari.
I had Activision Adventure, I think. Right? Was that from Atari?
Well, Pitfall.
Pitfall, that's the one. What a great game.
They were tired of not having their games on the boxes, and they didn't understand why a game that made $2 million didn't give them a bonus.
Are they the only independent gaming company that's still kind of very active?
Still around?
Yeah.
I mean, they're all technically still around because there have been so many acquisitions.
Right. They just got rolled up, right?
It's the mark that people buy the brand.
Well, I should say, I mean, not all.
The brand
many of them
and the original
around.
bits, right? Like,
if
anything, Gabe Newell and Steam rescued a lot of lost software of closed out companies and put them in a place where you can get them for $1 a piece.
Right. So, I've lost track of why we're talking about this. So,
consoles.
But this is really
consoles.
It's about exclusives, right? So this is the thing. So I would have said even just a few years ago, I never really, I was kind of anti exclusives, right? To me, I feel like games should just be out in the world, like they should be everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And
it's bad for consumers. It's good for the company, right? It sells.
Yeah, it's worked out great for Sony. It's worked out great for Nintendo. I still feel like Nintendo and Sony could still now do better. I don't understand why Nintendo doesn't release all of their classic games on the iPhone and the iPad. It just makes no sense to me. You have this classic library of games that people still want to play.
Yep.
But that's not the way they do things. So that's fine. Now, Microsoft has some exclusives, right? We know Gears of War, Halo, et cetera, but they've been slower to that. I think their game studio buying binge has been based around kind of building up that exclusive thing. But one of the things that came out in this was that not only does Sony have exclusives that they only ship on their own console, they actually pay studios millions of dollars so that they will not ship their games on Xbox.
Yeah.
That is incredible to me.
Well, I mean, isn't the root of this story Starfield? Because originally Starfield
Yes.
was going to be a PS5 only game. And
Yes,
now
this was one of the
arguably it'll be an
revelations.
Xbox only game.
That's why
That's right.
they
That's
bought.
right.
They bought.
Yeah, they had Sony had successfully convinced Activision Blizzard to release 2 games only on Sony
And really Bethesda, right?
and Bethesda. excuse
That's why
me,
they bought
and,
Bethesda. Yes, right.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm mixing it up.
Was it ZeniMax?
Starfield.
ZeniMax, which owned
ZeniMax is the
Bethesda,
parent,
which, you know,
yeah.
you can see this is how these things happen, right? Which owned id Software, which, you know, it's like this, you know, these companies are still kind of in there, you know, they're maybe not the same as they were in the past.
But there was
But yeah,
testimony
so-
that because they were so concerned about Starfield being an exclusive with Sony,
Right.
they bought ZeniMax.
That's right. To prevent that from happening.
Amazing.
It's amazing. It's astonishing to me, though, that in this world, you could have a business practice that amounts to paying partners to not support a competitor.
Mhm.
And how is that okay? How is that not anti-competitive? That's crazy. Microsoft at one point considered a strategy where they would outspend Sony so much that Sony would just go bankrupt. Like they literally considered just doing that to Sony all the time because they have infinite dollars and they could just buy up every game. And eventually they decided that was silly and they didn't do that. But because Sony is so predatory, they were like, how do we put a stop to this?
Well, you make the Xbox X $200,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
And you roll out Game Pass with all of the titles. Like, yeah, you can smash the market.
Yeah.
I would argue that's genuinely anti-competitive. That's dumping effectively.
Well, I would take the pro Microsoft argument and say it's a razor blade model, Richard.
I think it's a risk, though, that the judge. Yes, there's been a lot of.
You're right.
There's been a lot of evidence that maybe supports Microsoft here, but the judge might well say, all he are acting in your best interest, and it's damaging to the consumer. I mean, that's the case, right?
I think there's a strong case for the FTC coming out and saying in America, if the game is not available on all platforms, you can't ship the game.
Yeah.
Which would, by the way, be disastrous for Sony.
Oh, not just Sony. Lots of small independent game developers who are developing for exclusives. That's a lot of extra
big
work.
arguments.
Yeah.
One of my big issues with this FTC thing is that there's all this clear abuse going on in the game industry, and this is like who you chose to go after.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, whatever comes out of this, like, if the FTC wins or the FTC loses, Microsoft buys Activision Blizzard or doesn't, I don't think anyone's going after Sony.
No,
I don't think that happens.
That's one, by the way.
That blows my mind.
That's one of the conclusions I drew from the 4 days of testimony so far.
But
Sony is the worst.
They're the worst. And why isn't anyone going after them for this behavior?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What they are doing is crazy, and I mean, I think it's inarguably illegal, but that's just an opinion. Meanwhile, what we're worried about is like, what might Microsoft do? You know,
but it doesn't this really speak to an administration that is anti-tech giant?
Yes. Yep.
And also is pro-Japan because they're well positioned with relation to concerns around China. So you kind of don't want to mess with anything Japanese while you're trying to get some other things done over there. Like, I just wonder if there's some behind the scenes action here from.
I agree with you on this administration has a clear dictate to go after big tech. Mm-hmm. This is the barn door's already open. The horses are gone. I don't understand.
Oh no. And it's the thing is, if you're going to use the courts, generally speaking, the courts look at the law and there's no law here.
Yeah. Go after the biggest abusers, for starters. Microsoft is competing in a market here in which there is a serial abuser. That serial abuser has complained that Microsoft might, in fact, use its own strategy against it, and it doesn't like that. And somehow, regulators and courts have said, "Yeah, that's a problem."
That
and it's
seems
like,
wrong.
guys, what is happening? Like,
so what the judge though is not going to be saying. I mean, he might be saying this in his head, but he's not going to be saying, Sony's the problem here. He's going to judge the case on the merits of the case. Her. Sorry.
It's a woman. Sorry.
So, no, thank you. I'm sorry.
You're right. And I, but I think
because that's not
Sony's
the case before her is Sony's behavior.
Right. But here's the thing. So I don't know the numbers off the top.
And I don't think, I doubt she is doing what we're doing, which is saying, well, this is a case that Sony really brought. No.
I think logically she should be saying.
I know. Well, you and I know
What's the argument? What's the argument
but it
here?
wasn't Sony. It was the FTC, and I think she has to act as if this is not in Sony's interest. That this isn't Sony saying let's do something in our interest. She has to look at the case and the merits of the case, right?
Yes, and among the merits of the case is the fact that Microsoft competes in a market in which a serial abuser has run roughshod over this industry and done everything it can to disenfranchise Xbox.
Yeah.
Where Microsoft's whole thing has been, look, we just want games to be everywhere. We're not even asking for all of our games to be Xbox exclusives. I mean, there will be some. Of course there will. But even if, like, all but the biggest Activision Blizzard games somehow become Xbox exclusives, that pie chart where you show how many exclusive each company has, Nintendo and Sony are still way ahead.
Yeah.
You know, it's bizarre to me that they do this so much, and they're so concerned that Microsoft might do it with the 2 or 3 titles that have come up. See, they did it here.
This is my question: can the judge look at that as a whole, or does the judge have to look at the FTC's specific filing against Microsoft to decide whether Microsoft is a problem? Can she say, well, yeah.
Well, but that's part of the evidence. Yeah, I mean, this is part of evidence, right? This is the point of this testimony, right? That you see both sides of it. In other words, Sony says, yeah, look what they did. They bought this company and they made 2 of the games, one of which is a piece of crap, Xbox exclusives. Oh my God, can you believe how badly they're behaving?
Yeah, but Sony's not on trial here, right? Or
no, but that's the testimony. I know that. Microsoft says, yes, but this is apparently very common in this industry. Look how many games Sony has made an exclusive. By the way, Sony has paid more publishers money to keep more games off of our console than we have paid publishers to keep them only on our console. Like, what are we talking about here? This is the way
there's simple remediation here too. It's like, just say you won't do that.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Commit to it.
But okay, so, and I'm not sure how this kind of hearing in a civil case differs from, but you can't as a criminal defendant say, well, but everybody else is doing it. Isn't a defense, right? So I don't know if that's the case in this. It might be. It's
I don't either. I mean, honestly, that's right. I mean, no one has suggested this behavior is illegal in this courtroom, right? Yeah.
No,
I don't know.
It's not an illegality issue. It's an antitrust issue.
Right. It's an issue. Well, it's basically just about educating people about how this market works, right? So Microsoft has tried to compete in its own way. I mean, good, bad, indifferent, whatever. Sony has done their own thing. They've obviously been enormously successful. You know, the net result is that Microsoft has come in 3rd place. Microsoft knows it needs to make some changes. It's also missed out on some things, right? It hasn't. It doesn't have what I forget. I think the term he used, Phil Spencer called it an organic strategy for mobile, meaning they really haven't gone after mobile. They released a handful of silly games here and there, but you know, they've looked at acquisitions to solve this problem. It's kind of the typical big company solution, right? They actually considered buying over 100 different companies to try to figure this out. One of them was Square Enix, right? And one of the things they wanted to do with that company was get into Asia, because they also don't do well in Asia, but create a mobile native Game Pass offering, meaning native mobile games that you would download to your device and use as part of a subscription, just like we have on PC and console today. That's one thing they've considered. That's not happening.
I mean, the problem with buying Square Enix is they make Final Fantasy,
right,
exclusively for Sony.
Sure, the Final Fantasy, the Call of Duty of video games.
Wait a minute. I thought Call of Duty was the Call of Duty of video games.
That was my joke. I have to. Okay. I'll be right back. I apologize.
Okay. Paul's leaving. I worry about the it sounds like Microsoft's defense is we're doing this defensively. Like, well, we have to, Your Honor, because these other guys are so predatory. We have to be predatory. And I just wonder if the judge.
Well, I don't think they would use that language.
Well, but isn't that kind of
the problem?
But isn't that kind of what they're saying?
By the way, it's literally what they're saying, but they can't say predatory, right? No. In other words,
but I think they're trying to emphasize this is the way it's done in this business. But I don't think that makes it
that's what I meant.
Legal.
That's exactly right.
And I wonder what the judge's purview is. If she is allowed to say, yeah, you know, if you're going to succeed in this business, you have to be a jerk.
Well, okay. No, but
and it's okay. Go ahead, be a jerk. I don't think she's going to do that.
The
She
power
might say,
of any particular
she might say
platform.
Sony and Nintendo are not on trial here. You are. We should deal with
Right.
Sony, yes, but that's not the case in front of me right now. This episode of Tech Break is brought to you by ACI Learning. ACI Learning's courses are easy to navigate, and their structure is much more straightforward than traditional training programs. Try it for yourself, and then bring the whole team along. For individuals, use the code TWiT30 for 30% off a standard or premium individual IT Pro membership at go.acilearning.com/twit.